The sharp, mournful cry of an elephant shattered the stillness of the savannah, carrying with it a weight of desperation that was impossible to ignore. It wasn't the usual deep trumpeting or the familiar calls of a herd, but a sound soaked in pain, raw and filled with urgency. The man, already attuned to the rhythms of the wild, immediately felt his heart quicken. His body moved instinctively, drawn toward the source of the sound as the savannah, typically alive with the hum of insects and the calls of birds, now felt oddly quiet, the air heavy with the weight of that cry. It echoed across the land like a silent plea, a call that spoke of something far deeper than the simple noise of an animal in distress. The man's eyes darted across the horizon, searching through the swaying grasses and sparse acacia trees. The vastness of the savannah stretched endlessly before him, offering no easy answers. With every step he took, the cries grew more frantic, reverberating through the dry landscape. His breath was steady but quick, a reflection of the urgency that tugged at him from all sides. The air, hot and dry, pressed against his skin as he pushed forward, each step quickening as his mind raced to make sense of what was happening. Then, just ahead, he saw her, lone, isolated, and in distress. The elephant stood near the edge of a small clearing, her massive form rigid with tension. Her trunk reached out, as if grasping for something just beyond her reach, and her body trembled, each movement heavy with the weight of her struggle. Her eyes, once sharp and clear, were now clouded with confusion and desperation, their dark brown depths wide and filled with fear. She lifted her head high, letting out another heartbreaking cry that sliced through the stillness of the air. The sound reverberated across the empty savannah, a call that seemed to carry with it a kind of pleading, as if she was asking for something that no one was there to give. There were no signs of a predator, no evidence of injury that the man could immediately see. She appeared to be alone, something that didn't sit right with him. Elephants rarely traveled alone, and it struck him immediately that this elephant's isolation made her distress all the more poignant. The man felt a pang of sympathy as he watched her, standing helpless and alone in the vast, open land. It was unnerving, the sight of such a powerful creature brought to this state. His steps slowed, each one measured as he moved closer, not wanting to startle her. Her cries had softened, but they were still filled with pain, a soft, mournful sound that hung in the air like a lingering cloud. She swayed slightly on her feet, her large form sagging with what seemed like an invisible weight, as though the world itself had grown too heavy for her to bear. Her movements were slow, deliberate, but unsure, as if every step drained her of whatever small reserves of strength remained. The man paused a few feet away, feeling the tension between them. He was a stranger in this land, but here, in this moment, there was no divide. It was just him and the elephant, her agony echoing through the savannah in a way that no predator or danger ever could. Her body language spoke volumes, her raised head, the subtle tremor of her large ears, the quiet way her trunk flicked toward the air, as though calling out for something, or someone, that was no longer there. His mind raced as he stood there, trying to understand. What had caused this? Was she injured, or had she somehow become separated from her herd? The idea of an elephant alone in such a vast, dangerous landscape was unsettling. He had seen elephants grieve before, but this felt different. This was not the cry of a creature mourning its own kind. This was a cry of need, a desperate reach for help, one that seemed to fill the silence of the savannah with its weight. The man's chest tightened as he approached slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He lowered his voice, speaking softly. "It's okay," his words more for his own comfort than for the elephant's. She didn't move at the sound of his voice, though her large, dark eyes flickered briefly toward him, her breath shallow and strained. There was an undeniable rawness to the moment. The man could feel it in the air, the quiet desperation that hung between them, binding them in an unspoken understanding. He had always known that the wild was unforgiving, that animals survived by their instincts, by their strength, but here now he realized that in this vast, unyielding place there were moments of vulnerability, moments that broke even the strongest of creatures. In the face of that vulnerability, there was no separation, no distinction between human and animal. Only the silent plea for help, the connection formed between two beings on the edge of something larger than either of them could fully understand. The elephant's cry rang through the air again, fading into the quiet savannah, leaving behind a silence that seemed to carry the weight of everything unsaid. The man remained motionless for a moment, his eyes fixed on the elephant. She stood still, but there was an undeniable tremor in her massive frame, a subtle ripple of anxiety that betrayed her calm exterior. The faint quiver of her legs, the slight tremor in the muscles along her broad shoulders, spoke of the distress she was holding inside. Her large, dark eyes followed him carefully, their gaze steady, watching each movement, each step he took. Her trunk swayed gently in the air, a fluid motion, while her ears flicked occasionally, responding to the faintest sounds of the wind or the distant calls of birds. She did not move away, but neither did she approach. Her body was poised between caution and curiosity, a silent conversation unfolding between them. There was no immediate sign of aggression or overt fear, only the quiet wariness of an animal unsure of what to expect from this strange presence before her. With deliberate care, the man began to move forward. Each step he took was slow and purposeful, his movements calm, mindful of the need to establish trust without startling her. His presence remained measured, his pace steady, so that she could read his intentions clearly. He kept his distance, respecting the space she needed, but he did not retreat. He could sense that her anxiety was rooted in her uncertainty. She needed to feel that he was not a threat, that he would not cause her harm. As he continued to approach, the tension between them was palpable, but there was something else in the air too, the fragile potential for connection. The man could feel the weight of her gaze, the rhythm of her breathing, the subtle vibrations of her body as she waited, unsure but curious. His heart beat in time with hers, the quiet pulse of the moment shared between them. The elephant shifted slightly, her body still trembling. Her trunk lifted in a slow, deliberate arc, testing the air before her, as though trying to gauge the man's intentions from the very atmosphere around them. She touched the ground lightly, the gesture almost tentative, as if seeking some reassurance from the earth itself. Her movements were measured, cautious, like a creature navigating a new, unknown territory, yet her awareness of the man was keen, her senses alert. She was not running, she was not fleeing, but she was still caught in the delicate balance between fear and the need for comfort. The man understood this. He knew this was not the time to push her, not the time to rush forward. It was a moment of trust, fragile as glass, and it needed to be handled with great care. His voice, when it came, was low and soft, a calm whisper that barely rose above the quiet of the savannah. "It's okay, girl," he said, his tone steady and warm, offering reassurance. The words were gentle, but they were not meant to force a response. He knew his presence, more than his words, would be the key. The elephant's eyes, dark and steady, never left him. Her ears flicked back and forth, listening intently to every subtle sound, every movement, as she continued to assess the man before her. There was no immediate response from her, just the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest as she breathed deeply, her mind still caught between the need to protect herself and the instinct to seek comfort. The man moved another step closer, still slow, still careful. He could feel the tension in the air, thick and heavy, but he could also sense a shift, a subtle change in the atmosphere. The elephant no longer flinched at his presence. Her body, still trembling slightly, was no longer rigid. Instead, she seemed to soften, her stance less defensive. Her breath, once frantic, now came more evenly, the rapid pace of her exhalations slowing. It was as if she was beginning to realize that this man, this strange creature who had entered her world, was not a threat. The man, though his own heart raced with the tension of the moment, stood still, allowing the elephant the space she needed. He did not push, did not try to close the distance further. Instead, he simply allowed the silence to stretch, letting her come to him when she was ready. The air around them was thick with a quiet understanding. The occasional rustle of grasses, the distant murmur of the wind, these were the only sounds in the vast expanse. The elephant's large form, once so tense, now appeared softer, more relaxed, though still cautious. Her eyes, still fixed on him, had lost some of their wariness. There was a subtle shift in her expression, a small but significant sign that the first steps toward trust had been taken. She was not yet ready for physical contact, not yet ready to let go of her caution entirely, but she was allowing him to remain near her. And that, the man knew, was the beginning of something more. For what felt like an eternity, the world around them remained still, heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The air was thick, carrying the weight of the shared moment. The elephant, though exhausted, held her ground, her large form grounded in the dry earth beneath her. Her breathing, once shallow and erratic, had slowly begun to steady, the tremors that had racked her body gradually fading. But still, she did not move. Her body language was filled with uncertainty, her eyes locked on the man with a penetrating gaze. It was a look that spoke of wariness, yet something else, something deeper, seemed to shift within her. She wasn't ready to trust him fully, but there was a quiet recognition in her stillness, a recognition that something was different. Perhaps it was the quiet of the savannah, the vastness around them, that had allowed her to find a moment of peace. Then, just as the man began to think he might have reached the limit of what he could do, a change occurred. The elephant, with the weight of centuries of instinct and survival, took a single cautious step forward. It was slow, almost imperceptible, as though her body needed time to summon the courage to move. Her foot barely shifted in the dust, and yet to the man it felt monumental. His heart caught in his chest as the elephant moved closer, her head, once heavy with exhaustion, rising ever so slightly. She was not looking at him with the same fear as before, and for the first time, her trunk began to extend gently toward him. The small, trembling form she had been moments before now seemed more grounded, less fragile. The man's breath slowed in response, a quiet sense of awe filling him. He did not dare move, unwilling to disturb the delicate balance they were beginning to find. His presence was calm, steady, and though the moment felt fragile, he understood that this was not a time for urgency. The elephant's trunk waved slowly in the air, moving with purpose, testing the wind, testing the air around her. The motion was soft, not defensive, but curious, a gesture that spoke of something deeper than simple fear. It was a sign of acknowledgement, a question, and the man knew it was the first real step toward a kind of understanding. For a long moment, neither moved. The man's heart pounded quietly in his chest, feeling the gravity of the shift between them. The elephant's posture softened further, her large eyes now no longer only filled with fear, but with something more, something tentative, something fragile, but unmistakably accepting. The distance between them, once so wide, seemed to shrink with every passing second. Her movements slowed, becoming deliberate as she took another step toward him. Her trunk, now less hesitant, brushed against the man's extended hand, its touch soft and warm. The contact was fleeting, but it was enough. The barriers between them seemed to blur for just a moment, the space between human and animal becoming less defined. The man, heart racing with quiet emotion, gently placed his hand against the tip of her trunk. His touch was steady, light. There was no rush, no frantic urgency, only the soft, silent communication between two creatures who, for a brief moment, shared a quiet understanding. It was as if the world had stilled entirely for that instant. The elephant let out a low, deep rumble, unlike any sound she had made before. It wasn't a cry of distress, nor a warning growl that could shake the ground. No, it was softer, a sound of something deeper, a kind of acknowledgement or quiet comfort. The man stood still, his body relaxed, but his heart full, letting the moment stretch, not wanting to break the delicate bond they had just begun to form. In this silence, something profound had shifted, a fragile trust blossoming between them, a trust not yet fully formed but undeniably present. The savannah around them remained still, the tall grasses swaying ever so slightly in the breeze, as if time itself held its breath. For that brief moment, the man and the elephant were not separate beings. There was no divide between human and animal, no distinction between species. Instead, there was only a quiet connection, a mutual understanding that had been born in the silence, in the vulnerability of two beings reaching out in the most basic way possible. It was a moment that would linger, quietly and powerfully between them, a first step toward a deeper bond that would unfold slowly, quietly, over time. Just as the man allowed himself to feel the weight of the moment, a subtle shift in the elephant's posture caught his attention. It was as though time itself paused for a breath. The tentative step forward, which had been enough before, was no longer enough now. Slowly, carefully, the elephant began to move closer, the grace in her movements tempered by a quiet hesitation. Each step was deliberate, but there was something more in her body language, a force driving her forward, yet one that seemed to question the act, even as it unfolded. The man stood still, his heart beginning to race, yet careful not to make any sudden movements, respecting the fragile space between them. Then, in a moment that would forever change the course of their interaction, the unexpected happened. The elephant, with a slow and steady motion, lowered her head slightly, her trunk extending forward again. But this time there was purpose in the movement, a sense of intention that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just reaching for something, she was reaching out. The tip of her trunk brushed the air with quiet confidence, and then, as if inviting him in, she nudged him gently, her breath warm against his skin. The man's breath caught in his throat at the unexpected gesture. It was a quiet offering, a sign of trust, something that could not be spoken but could only be felt. She wasn't just acknowledging his presence, she was acknowledging him as a part of her world. The man's hand trembled as he reached out slowly, carefully, his fingers grazing the soft, leathery surface of her trunk. There was no fear now, only an overwhelming sense of awe. The elephant's eyes, large and dark, softened as their connection deepened. In that simple act, the man could feel her silent communication, her need for help, yes, but also something far deeper. It was a recognition of his presence, of his care, a quiet plea for understanding and companionship in the face of isolation. It was as if, in this one shared moment, she was offering him a part of herself, her vulnerability, her strength, and her gratitude. The trunk, once a symbol of her power, wrapped gently around his hand. It was firm, but not forceful, a touch of respect, not dominance. The man's heart swelled with an emotion he could not name as he placed his other hand carefully on her massive body, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his palm. There were no words exchanged, for they were not necessary. The communication between them was far more profound than any spoken language could convey. In that instant, the man realized that he had done more than just offer comfort to an animal in pain. He had forged something much greater, a connection that transcended the divide of species, one that bridged the gap between trust and fear, between the untamed wild and human compassion. The elephant, with her trunk still wrapped around his hand, seemed to hold him there for just a moment longer, as if savoring the quiet strength of their connection. Then, as if understanding that their time together had reached its natural conclusion, she slowly pulled back, her movements graceful and unhurried. Her final glance, a soft, lingering look, seemed to hang in time, as though she too felt the weight of what had passed between them. The man, standing motionless, knew in his heart that something profound had just taken place. Not just a moment of relief, but the mending of something deeper, something that could not be undone. As the elephant began to move away, her presence still lingering in the air like a quiet melody, the man remained still. The bond they had shared in that brief exchange would stay with him forever. There was no need for words, no grand farewell. In the silent trust of the elephant, he had found a reminder of the deep, unspoken connections that could exist between creatures, even in the face of immense isolation and hardship. Whatever had been broken, in her body and in his heart, had been mended, not by force, but by the quiet gesture of one being reaching out to another. The elephant stood still for a moment longer, her massive form unmoving yet calm, as if she were taking in the full weight of the connection that had formed between them. Her breath, once shallow and labored, had slowed, the steady rise and fall of her chest now smooth and rhythmic. The tremors that had once racked her body had faded, replaced by the quiet strength that came with healing. Her eyes, dark and deep, lifted towards the man, meeting his gaze for a brief moment, a silent exchange that spoke volumes. In that instant, there was no need for words, no need for outward gestures. The bond they shared was understood in the way their gazes met, the unspoken recognition of trust, of survival, of life in its rawest form. Her trunk, once heavy with distress and trembling from the weight of fear, now swayed gently in the warm breeze that swept across the savannah. The man stepped back slowly, respecting the space she needed. Her body was still strong, but it was hers to move as she wished. The cubs, who had lingered quietly at the edge of the scene, now appeared, cautiously approaching their mother. Their small forms moved with hesitation, but their presence was unmistakable. They stood together, the three of them forming a quiet circle, the elephant's body language radiating calm reassurance as she welcomed them. There was no frantic movement, no urgency, just the steady rhythm of life continuing as it should. The man watched from a distance, his heart full but silent, knowing that this moment was more than a rescue or a mere intervention. It was a connection, one that transcended the simple act of helping. He had not been a savior in the traditional sense, but a witness to a deeper, quieter exchange. In this shared space, with the wind carrying the scent of the wild and the horizon stretching endlessly before them, he had witnessed something profound. There had been no grand gestures, no outward celebration. What had transpired between them was more delicate, more meaningful than any show of emotion could express. The elephant had been given space to heal, and in return, a trust had been formed. A trust that would linger long after the moment had passed. The elephant gave a final soft rumble, a low sound that resonated through the earth. It was not a call, but an acknowledgement of the bond that had been forged in silence. With that, she turned slowly, her body moving with graceful, steady strides. The cubs followed closely behind, their small feet light in the dust as they moved together, a unit bound by more than just blood, by the quiet strength of survival. The man stood still, his gaze never wavering as they made their way across the land. There was no need to follow, no need to rush toward them. This was their moment, their time to return to the wild, and he was content to simply watch. The savannah stretched out before him, vast and silent once again, but now it held the memory of something much deeper, something that could never be fully captured in words. As the elephant and her cubs slowly disappeared into the horizon, the man took a deep breath, exhaling slowly, letting the peace of the moment wash over him. He knew that this was the last moment he would share with them, yet he also knew that the bond they had shared would stay with him, quietly etched into his soul. It was the end of an encounter, but also the beginning of something much more lasting, something that would forever remain with him, a part of his connection to the wild. The elephants, now moving steadily toward their rightful place in the vast expanse of the savannah, vanished into the distance. The man stood there for a moment longer, his heart still full of the quiet gratitude that had settled deep within him. As they disappeared from view, he turned away, carrying with him the profound weight of the moment. The savannah, still and empty once more, held within it the memory of life, trust, and healing. A memory that would stay with him forever, quietly, unspoken, but deeply understood.